HSC English Advanced is hard. Success in the subject often seems opaque. Its marking criteria seem helpful, and the syllabus requirements are difficult to understand at the best of times. Revising dot points like you might do for a science is impossible. Targeting your practice on particular areas of the syllabus like you might do for maths is really hard when you don't know what areas of the syllabus to target. In fact, the tried and true methods for HSC success seem to break down. It can become difficult for even the highest achieving of students to do well at this subject. I know that advanced was a challenge for me. In year 11, I started to panic about my English marks. I'd always been good at English, but now I realized that I wouldn't be able to get through on natural ability alone. So I worked harder. I memorized essays. I learnt whole pages of quotes. I tried to adapt pre-prepared material to questions. But it wasn't enough. Sometimes I do well and get full marks. But thinking that I was doing exactly the same things, I'd then get mediocre results at a totally different assessment task. I realized something had to change. So come year 12, I spoke with my teachers. I developed consistent study habits. I focused on skills and on developing a critical approach to English. And the results seem to have paid off. I got a 97 in English Advanced in my final HSC mark. And I came first in New South Wales in English Extension 1 and in English Extension 2. And I managed all of that without sacrificing my performance in other subjects. I came first in the state in Latin Continuers, German Continuers, and German Extension. And I scored 12th in New South Wales in Modern History and 15th in Legal Studies. My approach worked well then, but that was back in 2014. Now, starting from 2019, things won't be as easy as they were. In fact, NESA is shaking up the English Advanced syllabus, and there's a crucial ramification. The old methods of memorizing and adapting that some students used to rely on just won't work. That means that the approach which I took, an approach which favoured consistent work and a skills-based approach to English Advanced, is now the only means of succeeding. Before we go into this approach, let's summarise the changes that NESA is making to the English Advanced syllabus, so you can contextualise what we're going to talk about in this video. The big takeaway is that memorisation is dead. NESA killed it because they want students to think more critically and actually engage with their studies of literature. That means more specific questions, more excerpt-based tasks, and a focus on personal reflection. There's a second big change which has killed memorization, and that's in the variety of assessment tasks. From 2019, all New South Wales schools will be limited to subjecting their Year 12 students to just 4 internal assessments. These assessments together will still make up 50% of your English Advanced mark. But unlike in previous years, all of these 4 must be of a different type, and your school can only give you 1 formal written assessment task. That means that you'll only be subjected to doing an in-class essay once before the final HSC exam. To compensate for that, the variety of tasks you undertake throughout the year will increase. There'll be speeches, you might have to conduct interviews, write short stories, develop reflective statements, and even edit videos in line with the requirement for 1 multimodal presentation across the year. That variety means that learning a pre-prepared essay and hope to adapt it to a question and rely on that as your ticket to success. You now have to broach a whole different set of skills and become competent at developing your abilities in each. But that's just for internal assessment tasks. When it comes to the final HSC exam, the Board of Studies has introduced even more variety that also kills your ability to succeed on memorization alone. Let's break this down. There are still 2 papers in the final exam. Paper 1, which is shared with English Standard students and addresses the core human experience and text module, and then Paper 2, which is specific to English Advanced students. In Paper 1, the previous 2-hour-long exam has now been shortened to 1.5 hours long, and now includes only 2 components: a set of unseen questions on unseen texts, and then an essay question about your set human experiences text. In paper 1 then, the essay question is going to abandon the old generic approach of the common module. Instead, there'll be a focus on specific textual techniques, perhaps a stimulus question or a piece of critical opinion. It's even possible now for the Board of Studies to set one of the unseen texts for the comprehension task as your related text for that essay. When it comes to the comprehension task itself, there are also big changes. For the first time, English Advanced students will have a separate question assigned to them, which English Standard students don't have to do. This will increase the demands on your time management and on your critical engagement with texts that are promising to be of a high caliber indeed. Let's then look at paper 2 and the changes there. Mod A and Mod B both demonstrate the broad trend towards more specific questions. It looks more than ever that the questions for both of these modules will focus on, say, a stimulus or an excerpt drawn from the text that you're studying. For Mod B, it's even possible that you'll be asked to engage with a critic's opinion, some theoretical piece of writing that you may or may not have read in preparation for your essay. That brings us then to Mod C, where the changes are broad indeed. Mod C used to be tested with an essay, but now for the first time, you'll be asked to write some kind of creative or reflective piece instead. That's in line with the module's new focus on the craft of writing. So you'll be forced to, for instance, write a creative rewording of the last passage of your set text, or perhaps write a journal entry from a key character's point of view in your text. After that, the second half of the question will ask you to reflect creatively and evaluatively on the choices that you made, proving that they were the right ones. All of this, again, means that you can't just learn essays and instead have to become competent with a broad variety of skills if you want to succeed in this new environment. So, there are a whole range of new challenges, and in order to adapt to those new challenges, we require a whole range of new techniques. Let's think about now how you might change your method for studying English Advanced in order to succeed. So, how exactly are you going to tackle the challenges of the new syllabus? I'm going to break these down for you one by one and give you the exact approach, the approach that I used and the approach that is now necessary in order to get good marks. So the first challenge, you need to critically engage with literature. I'm not just telling you this because I want you to appreciate literary texts, even though I also do want you to do that. I'm telling you this because this is the sole way that you can adapt to the requirements of the English Advanced course. Ultimately, this is a literary studies course. It's about how texts interrelate and how audiences respond to those texts. And, as we've seen, under the new syllabus, these questions have only become more complex. Now, for the first time, texts are more demanding, and the questions that the board is going to ask you are more specific. So you have to understand literature, develop a personal perspective on it, and engage with those texts at a higher standard. This is crucial groundwork for then being able to write well and improvise well in response to different assessment task questions which you might have never encountered before. So how are you going to develop this personal literary engagement? So firstly, you're going to read all of your texts right before you start Year 12. If you don't know your Year 12 texts yet, make sure you obtain a list from your teachers. They'll be able to tell you. You can ask them to distribute your texts to you in advance already, or you can source them under your own steam. Then, at the same time as you're reading your set texts, you're going to start developing a reading habit. And by that I mean you're going to read material other than your set texts. Reading in itself is powerful and it can deepen the meaning of your life experiences. But don't get me wrong, reading more will directly improve your marks. It will give you access to the ideas you need to engage with in your set texts, and it will expose you to the kind of writing you need to emulate in your assessment task responses. If you don't read currently, start with small goals. Aim to maybe read 10 minutes a day or read one short story per week. It's important to focus on texts which are similar to those you're studying and similar to those that you're going to have to produce yourself. You can also kill two birds with one stone here and look for a related text for the human experiences and text module. That's reading. The next step in developing your literary engagement is to then read the rubric document and internalize the syllabus requirements for each module. Each module has one of these rubric documents, the common module included. This is a short description. It's written by the Board of Studies, or NESA, which explains what the module's core concepts are and on what terms you have to engage with them. Each of these rubrics is publicly available on the Board of Studies website. You can just Google it and look for it under the English Advanced New 2019 exam. In the rubric document, each modules are listed on page 52 to 55. So find those and make sure that you're reading them as you read your prescribed texts for the year. At the same time, you should break down the core requirements of the rubric document and track the key concepts that the rubric brings up. Let's take a look at the common module as an example. The common module is about texts and human experiences. So what does the common module tell you, and what things should you be looking for as you read your set texts? 1. The common module firstly explains the module's thematic focus. You have to consider how texts represent individual and collective human experiences and the human qualities and emotions associated with human experience. So look for that in your texts. Then secondly, the rubric gets more specific. You're being asked to focus on the anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies in human behavior and motivations. So you have to look for these features too. Then thirdly, the rubric tells you how you should be thinking about your texts. You have to appreciate, explore, interpret, analyze, and evaluate the ways language is used to shape the representations of human experience. That means you need to understand not just what your texts are saying about human experience, but how their language conveys aspects of human experience. Then, fourthly, you have to analyze how your texts invite the responder to see the world differently, to challenge assumptions, ignite new ideas, or reflect personally. This is a reader response focus. You have to think about the effect that your text might have on its reader and how a reader might change personally because of the text. And this comes down again to the way the text is constructed and thinking about the language it uses and how you might respond to that language. Fifthly, you're being asked to consider the role of storytelling throughout time to express and reflect particular lives and cultures. This means NESA wants you to think about the narrative your text generates and responds to. These narratives might be located outside the text, maybe in folklore or in cultural tropes. And as you read, you have to think about how your text responds to these different tropes, maybe coming-of-age stories, and reflects on them to construct a broader understanding of how the human experience plays out across time, at different stages in our lives, and at different points in history. Then the rest of the rubric concerns the kind of texts you have to study, and the kind of analysis you have to perform when you write about those texts. These key concepts that emerge from the rubric need to shape your reading and your thinking. And as you engage with your prescribed text, you should reformulate the rubric into a couple of focus questions. An example of what the focus questions might look like for the common module is something like this. 1, what are some examples of human experience and its associated emotions inside the text? 2, what are some examples of anomalies and inconsistencies in human behavior and motivations? 3, how is human experience represented? What position is the text taking? 4, how does the text construct that representation? What language is used? How does that language relate to the purpose, structure, and stylistic features of the text? 5, how does the text invite responders to see the world differently? Consider its language again, as well as its purpose. 6, what does the text say about storytelling? How does it use narratives, construct stories, and respond to its context to shape our understanding of human experience? You should ask these questions not just when you're reading your prescribed text, but in your general reading as well. And as you read both your prescribed and your related text, you should gather a bank of evidence. Jot down features of language, quotes from the text, observations about their structure, form, and representations of human experience. These will inform your thinking as you develop a critical opinion on the module, and it will also make your life easier later when you need to select evidence for your arguments, for essays, for speeches, even for creative-based reflections. So, that's the rubric sorted. But on to the next step. You have to absorb others' ideas. Firstly, this means listening and thinking critically about what your teacher is saying in class. This is crucial. So in class, make sure you take notes, engage in discussion, and ask yourself a couple of the following questions. What is my teacher saying that I understand? Secondly, what do I not understand? Thirdly, what ideas do I agree with? Fourthly, which do I not agree with? Fifthly, then, think back to the questions you have already posed about the rubric and ask, how does my teacher's analysis answer these rubric questions? And secondly, what does it leave unanswered? But your teacher's thoughts are not where it ends. You should look for critical material about your text written by scholars. There are a few places you could find this. Your library, databases of scholarly articles like JSTOR, that's spelled JSTOR, which offer some of their material for free. Or then finally, university libraries. You should ask the same questions of critical material as you would of your teacher's in-class analysis, so that you absorb some kind of inspiration for your own ideas. That takes us to the next step, which is refining your ideas in response to the critical material that you're considering. Again, frame this as answers to the questions into which you've reformulated the rubric. You should be looking for achieving an understanding of the text, one that you can deploy to meet all the rubric requirements and use for any assessment task type. By this point, you've developed a critical engagement with literature and with your text in question in a way that will answer the module's requirements and allow you to adapt that material for any question that the Board of Studies throws at you. The next step here is to make sure that you are gathering evidence. It's crucial. Any analytical task, an essay, a speech, or a multimodal presentation requires you to support your ideas. Examples from the text are essential. So reread your texts or the key passages and find aspects that support your ideas. Look for the big themes in the text, jot down notes about the way that characters perhaps reflect those big themes, then look to textual form. Consider why the text is a novel or a play or a poem, and what does its novel or play or poem form relate to its exploration of the human experience. And then look to language techniques. And that's often what students call quotes. But you need to ask how those language techniques actually generate meaning for a responder. What does the reader feel when they read those language techniques, and what do they think as a result? So you want to be able to use this evidence in an essay, reflect on it in creative responses, and use it to inform your further investigation of your texts. The final step is to test your ideas. You have to make sure they actually work. Firstly, discuss them with your teacher and take on board any feedback about their plausibility and how well they relate to the module. It's also crucial to ensure that your ideas are usable for the kind of assessment task that you're actually going to be confronted for the module in question. So your teachers will be able to tell you what their internal assessment tasks will be for that module, and you already know, just from looking at the Board of Studies website, what the external assessment task will be. So look at past papers that are relevant to that type of assessment task and make sure that your ideas are actually deployable in speech form or in creative writing form or reflection form, whatever the assessment task in question is. So to summarize, you need to develop a critical engagement with literature. You do that through treating English as a broad conversation with literary authority. You have to develop a reading habit, you have to scrutinize the rubric and develop a set of key questions that you ask yourself as you engage with the set text. You need to generate ideas in response to your teachers and to critical material, and you need to embrace all of the complexity of the texts that you're studying. This is going to leave you ready for anything that this new and variable syllabus can throw at you, far and beyond the standard memorization approach, where all of your eggs are effectively in one basket. This is a big focus of ours at Delta, where critical engagement is something we prioritize. All of our teachers have a New South Wales state rank in English, which means that they bring a calibre and depth to the kind of literary analysis that they perform. But unlike in some contexts, this literary analysis isn't pointless. It's literary analysis which always, in each of our lessons, responds directly to the rubric and the requirements of the modules. That means you know how the in-depth analysis you're being taught actually marries up with the kinds of writing that you have to do to get high marks. Delta also provides useful resources. Each of these is text-specific and takes the form of detailed notes written to each text. The rubric is broken down in each set of resources, as well as the relevant analysis you might perform under each rubric requirement and each module heading. These are written to a tertiary level by, again, a team of state-ranking resource writers, and they include useful aspects of HSC performance, things like model essays or critical material that might inspire your own writing. All of this provides you a massive advantage, an advantage over and above students relying on the old methods of memorization and quote regurgitation, as well as an advantage above those who just don't have access to the same level of resources. So that's how you develop a critical engagement with English literature in order to respond to the requirements of a new, ever more variable and unpredictable syllabus. So challenge 1 is out of the way. That brings us on to challenge 2. Developing the right skills. That brings us to the second challenge you'll need to overcome, namely developing more skills and developing the right skills. It should be clear by now that the new syllabus is skills obsessed and that you'll need to develop a variety of skills to write effectively and address the requirements of a broadened number of different assessment task types. In the syllabus documents, the kinds of skills you can be assessed on are broken down into 2 categories: skills in responding and skills in composing. Let's take an overview of each. So firstly, skills that relate to responding. The Board of Studies defines responding as the activity that occurs as students read, listen to, or view texts. Responding involves, and I quote, identifying, comprehending, selecting, articulating, imagining, critically analysing, and critically evaluating. You need a firm understanding of each of these terms. And they're each important because they can all inform the types of questions you'll be asked for any different assessment task. Fortunately, the Board of Studies provides a direct definition of 4 of the critical terms. So firstly, evaluation means making a judgment based on criteria, determining the value of something. Secondly, analysis means identifying components and the relationship between them, drawing out and relating implications to one another. Thirdly, critical, which is an adverb added to critically evaluating and critically analysing. Critical means adding a degree or level of accuracy, depth, knowledge, and understanding, logic, questioning, reflection, and quality to your analysis or evaluation. And fourthly, identifying means recognizing and naming something. So that's 4 of those terms. The remaining 4 are pretty self-explanatory. So we've got comprehension. Comprehension means you have to understand aspects of a text. We've got selection, which means you have to include relevant material, often examples, which will act as evidence for your arguments or inform your thinking and responding. Then we have articulating, which means you have to explain your response. It's all about communicating. And then we've got imagining. And imagining is all about translating your thinking and your responding into a creative form. So taking it away from analysis and into things like short stories or reflective works. You have to familiarize yourself with all of these different conceptual terms and include them in your bank of skills to learn. So that as you're exploring the syllabus document and then you eventually end up writing your own responses, you can draw on exactly what you need to do according to NESA and put that into practice. That takes us to the second group of skills, and those are skills in composing. The Board of Studies defines composing as the activity that occurs as students produce written, spoken, or visual texts. It then goes on to say that composing includes, firstly, shaping, making, and arranging textual elements to explore and express ideas, emotions, and values. That means that your composing has to be meaningful. You're composing with a purpose, and that purpose is conveying the ideas or emotions that are relevant to English Advances modules. The board's definition of composing goes on then to include a second point, namely the processes of imagining, drafting, appraising, reflecting, and refining. These skills concern the compositional focus, and they relate to Mod C in particular. The new syllabus and Mod C stresses awareness of what makes good writing. Mod C is all about how you are writing, why different composers write and how they write, and what makes their writing powerful. That brings us to the board's final inclusion under the composition heading, and that's composition means knowledge, understanding, and use of the language forms, features, and structures of texts. That means you have to be familiar with the features of the text types that you yourself are being asked to write. It's not just about the set texts that you interact with, it's also about the kind of writing you do for your own assessment tasks. You then have to deploy the conventions relevant to those assessment tasks with skill and control in order to express the kinds of ideas and emotions that we addressed before as being critical to the compositional process. So the most common text types you'll encounter in the assessment tasks that you're asked to write are essays, then reflection statements, creative works, speeches, multimodal presentations, and unseen comprehension tasks, where you answer questions on texts that you've never seen before. For each of these assessment tasks, you're going to be judged on how well you use the conventions of that textual form. So, there's a lot to piece together here. How are we actually going to hone your skills and develop those skills in a way that addresses the variety that the new syllabus throws at you? The first step is to evaluate your own performance. Consider the sorts of skills we've just discussed. Then, look back through your assessment tasks from the past year. What kind of feedback did you get? What did you do well, and what needs work? As best as you can, review the feedback your teachers give you in light of the skills that we just talked about before, and aim to think about what you need to improve on that matches up with the Board of Studies syllabus requirements. The second step here is to develop actionable goals. If you've consistently underperformed in a particular skill area, you should make that your focus. So, once you have an area to focus on, you have to set out an ideal to aim for. You'll need to consult exemplar work to do this, so that you can determine what your own writing ideally should strive for. You can look to the kind of sample responses which NESA posts on its website. Your school might also have model scripts that have been written by high-performing past students. On top of HSC-specific resources, it's also crucial to look to literary exemplars. We already talked about developing a reading habit, but reading is also critical for developing your own writing and your own skills in writing. Canonical, established authors write in the same formats that you yourself are being asked to attempt in your assessment task. And, as you might expect, those authors tend to write particularly well. So learn from their style as best you can. Imitate whatever you find compelling in their writing. You can break this down by the different assessment formats you might be asked to address. And there are a couple of suggestions I can give you of the sorts of authors under those formats that you might look to. So, firstly, for essays, look to anything written by George Orwell. You can look at his political and social writings, and you can also consult other great thinkers of the past 2 centuries. Think of people like Sigmund Freud or the essays of Virginia Woolf. If we're thinking about reflective writing then, you can consider the kinds of literary reflections that canonical authors tend to perform. They tend to like thinking about literature and what they themselves are writing. So a good place to start might be Italo Calvino's Why Read the Classics. You could also look to Susan Sontag's literary and feminist essays. Then, think short stories. Joyce's Dubliners and any short story by Virginia Woolf are often considered definitional of the English short story. So focus on these 2 authors to understand that text type's conventions. And finally, consider speeches. Any collection of speeches that changed the world or something similar can be handy, and you can find outstanding pieces of oratory filmed and recorded on YouTube. Barack Obama's political rhetoric is a good contemporary example. But whatever the text type, you need to analyze the exemplars that you find so that you can understand what makes them successful. This process will give you insight not only into the skills of composition, but also skills relating to response. So let's return to the example of reflective writing and think about how this might work. If you find and then pull apart good reflections, you'll get a sense of the text type's defining compositional features. In doing so, you yourself will be responding, practicing your own skills in analysis and criticism, as well as considering how authors of your exemplar texts perform those same skills, responding to their own worlds and their own textual concerns. So, you might find that a good literary reflection will, firstly, have a personal voice. Might speak in first person or rely on relevant personal anecdotes to explain its attitude toward the text in question. Secondly, it might set out the type of evaluation it's going to perform. For instance, it might evaluate the effectiveness of texts or their social impact or their reception in different points of history. Thirdly, for whatever the type of evaluation, a good reflection will set out clear criteria for its judgments. So to evaluate for effectiveness, for example, it might consider whether a text has a central message, whether it conveys that central message with appropriate language, and whether it's aesthetically pleasing. Fourthly, a good reflection will base its evaluation on specific examples in the text. So that gives you an idea of the kind of key conventional and defining features you can extract from analysing the exemplar texts you look at. But setting up an ideal of what you should be striving for each textual format is not enough, nor is just passively practicing your responding by reading those text types. Instead, you actually have to start practicing composing yourself. This step is crucial. Frequent writing is the only way to hone and internalize the skills that you will need when faced with assessment tasks. So how do you go about doing this? Firstly, find past papers. That might be difficult given that the new syllabus is only just being introduced. Even so, the Board of Studies has published a pretty long sample exam for both Paper 1 and Paper 2 on its website. Your teachers can also mock up assessment task questions for you. Then, the next step is to actually start practicing. This is where skills development process aligns with the critical engagement with literature that we've already discussed. Think about your texts and, like we said, ask the module's key questions. As you develop your opinions, road test them by attempting assessment tasks for that set of texts. You can start off gently. You could maybe write body paragraphs for essay tasks, or just scenes from a creative, or maybe an introduction to a speech. Gradually, increase the difficulty of the task. Begin trying for full essays or full creatives. Time yourself. Give yourself less and less planning time before you begin writing. You should also, as far as possible, handwrite your practice attempts. That's because all of your timed exams will still be handwritten, whereas hand-in tasks, where you can use word processing, don't submit you to time pressure. That means legible and fast handwriting is a skill in itself, and one that you need to work on across the year. But crucially, throughout this process, make sure you're submitting your work for feedback. This is an essential step. There's no point practicing if you're internalizing the wrong things. And it's easy to stray from the correct path if you're not having your work checked constantly. We already talked about how English can be conceived of as a great big conversation. And that conversation requires you to communicate your ideas that you've thought through, and it requires you to respond when other people then critique your ideas. So take on board the feedback that you're given. Make sure that every time you attempt a new task, you're incorporating it into your work and that you're building towards focusing on those key areas of weakness and on perfecting them. Submit as many assessment tasks as possible to your teacher and take on board what they say in the lead up to your exams as they approach. So, let's think about putting it all together now. You have to approach your assessment tasks critically and skillfully. In this way, you marry up the two major challenges that we've talked about in this video. Because when it comes to success in advanced, skillful writing and critical writing are non-negotiable. You have to deploy your ideas in a way that meets essay requirements, both conventional essay writing requirements and the requirements of the module. You have to write creatives that engage with the syllabus, but also which demonstrate the key conventions of short story writing. Over time, by attempting enough practice tasks, you'll become confident with a range of questions and a range of assessment types. You can join up your ideas with these different skills. You can use all that in-depth critical engagement to offer well-argued, logical responses to essay questions. You can develop powerful narratives for creatives. Aim ultimately to be able to improvise, to feel confident enough and have attempted enough different essay and creative and speech questions that you can shape up your arguments no matter the tone of the task. Learn to emphasize different parts of your ideas in response to different questions, and make sure that you've thought about everything that you possibly can within the scope of the module. Step 1, you need to critically engage. You then need to read the rubric, understand its requirements, and reformulate it into questions which can guide your thinking in line with the Board of Studies requirements. You then need to develop your own critical insights, opinions that you develop in response to those of others, including your teachers, as well as academics. Out of that, you have to derive a core argument and set of logical points of view on your texts for each module. Then, step 2, you need to develop skills. Those skills are located in the syllabus, and the requirements that you need to conquer are there. You need to practice widely, and you need to be able to get across all of the different assessment types that the Board of Studies might throw at you in order to be able to improvise and adapt to different textual requirements. That's a high-level roadmap of the kinds of things that you have to do in order to succeed under the new syllabus. But it's not enough to just know the high-level detail of the plan for success. You have to fill in the gaps. Knowing that you need feedback isn't actually going to help you unless you get feedback. And that's where somebody who can guide you through this process comes in. At Delta, we have a team of high-achieving, state-ranking teachers who can give you the literary insights that you need, the feedback on your work that can guide you, and the constant review of your performance that will set you on the right path to success. These are tools which are essential now more than ever under the new syllabus. And at Delta, we can give you those tools to succeed in HSC English Advanced and even to flourish. If you are interested in hearing more about Delta's services, please don't hesitate to contact us. We can arrange an enrollment information session. We can hear all about our services and more about how you can succeed in this subject.